We have played a message here, probably I'm going to say now for the better part of, it's probably 45 plus years, affectionately known here as VF 166, which if you don't know what that is, that means you're kind of new here, right? Because anybody who knows when I say VF 166, they immediately know that is the message of Peter's fall and restoration. But I want to be a little bit more diligent. I want to look at Peter for the purpose of failure and restoration, but in a completely, maybe in a different light. It is Peter's declaration, which I have probably mentioned here ad nauseum, at Caesarea Philippi in Matthew 16, where kind of randomly, Jesus says, who in the circle of things that you hear, who do they say that I am, and who do you say that I am? It's Peter's declaration that says, thou art the Christ. That is like we'll call it the first pat on the back for Peter. Yay, good job, right? And in the next breath, from being complimented by our Lord, flesh and blood hath not revealed this to you. In the next breath, when Jesus begins to talk about death and dying, Peter's reaction is, be it far from you. He rebukes Jesus. Even when I read the words, it's kind of hard for me to wrap my mind around Peter's rebuking Jesus, like, he's just any other person to be rebuked. But there are some interesting character traits that I wish for us to tap into as we look at this person, which I think will be helpful for us. Remember, here's the guy in the entire Bible, apart from Jesus. He's the only guy that walks, even if he took one step, he walked on water, okay, more than anybody else in recorded history. Interestingly enough, that he had enough faith when the storm kicked up and he sees Jesus and he's crying out, seeing Jesus coming, thinking he's a ghost, and then sees it's Jesus. As Jesus says, come to me. For a millisecond in his mind, he had the faith that he could, until the flesh or reality kicked in and he began to sink. And of course, Jesus doesn't let him sink. I probably would have. But it's kind of an interesting study. It is really the way we are, if you think about it. We go from highs and lows. There are times when we are, I'd say, ever increasing in our faith, so strong that, for example, if we're sick, sometimes we go to the table of the Lord, and just the act of faith brings about something that says, I'm healed, right? Just, I say those momentary small events, because it's not constant. We're not walking on water all the time. Most of the time we're sinking. If we're really honest as Christians, we're sinking. We're not walking on water. And we may be delusional in thinking we took one step, in our minds it was 10. It's like that great fishing story, right? So there is a lot, as I said, to glean from this person. But I think the biggest mistake in touching every time this message has been preached is not going back to point something out that I think may have gone to Peter's head as well. And I'm going to tell you what that is. You read in John's Gospel, if you want to turn there with me, chapter 13. And they are in the upper room. They begin about verse 5. After that he poureth the water in the basin, began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter said unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I wash thee not, thou shalt have no part with me. Peter said, Okay, wash me all over, right? And I want you to kind of do something. We tend to read these things and we immediately make a caricature of Peter, but I want you to kind of try and make some personal applications. That's when it becomes real, okay? A lot of times we approach Jesus a little bit like Peter, like, no, that would be too degrading, or I don't want that. But in reality, whatever Jesus says, he's the boss here. It should have been, yes, sir, right? Instead, we tend to want to tell God how it's going to be. And it's not the way that works. So kind of put that as a little note right there. If you have that spirit, that's something you need to check yourself. I've seen this before, and I'll paint a different picture. People who tend to not pray, to not ask God for help, and they fall on hard times or they get sick, which is what I call the moment God brings you to your knees, but then it becomes the case of all or nothing. Instead of being committed in prayer, faithfully faithing and doing your part, it's almost like battlefield faith or battlefield religion. It only matters in the moment. So put a little note right there. That's one. The second thing that I glean is in this same chapter, in the same area, Jesus is going to tell his disciples something really important. That would be in the 13th chapter, in the 34th verse. He says, "A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another." And here's where it gets interesting. So the word there, obviously, that Jesus used, love, is agape, and I've explained this many times. There are many different words in the Greek to express love. Agape, more probably succinctly, is more of the God-man relationship, unconditional love that comes from God, that is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. I do not believe that we have the capacity in the natural to have agape. It takes God to give us that. In the natural, we can produce what's called phileo. We get the city of brotherly love from that, Philadelphia. I do for you, you do for me. A reciprocal type of love. That is not the type of love. When he said love one another, it is that love that is unconditional, no strings attached. When Jesus gives the instructions, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another," maybe we're guilty of what Peter does too. I think that Peter processed a lot of words of Christ, filtered through his brain, and maybe, sometimes the filter doesn't exactly line up with what the words were intended to mean. I think maybe Peter started thinking about how much he loved Christ, not loving one another. That may be manifested later. But I think Peter's brain started functioning more like, I really love the Lord so much. Sometimes we do that. We build things up that aren't as big as they are. And I think in Peter's case, there's good reason to believe that maybe Peter had an idea of his love to Christ that wasn't exactly correct. And we know that actually, okay? So why do I say this? Because if you read this whole section, you come across beginning in verse 36 in the same 13th chapter, "Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, whither thou goest? Jesus answered him and said, Whither I go, thou canst not follow me now. Thou shalt follow me afterwards. Peter said unto him, Lord, why can I follow thee now? I will lay down my life for thy sake. And Jesus answered him, Wilt thou lay down thy life for my sake? Verily, verily, I say unto you, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice. 3 times you'll deny me. So something here about the way Peter perceives his commitment and his love to Christ that I want us to just kind of take a second and go, stop right there. Because we're masters at being delusional. This may sound like some really negative thing, but actually it's designed to wake some of us up, okay? You can have a delusional idea even of your relationship to Christ. I meet people all the time who think they know me. I've never met them before. They watch me on TV. They watch me on the internet. And I have been in places where people walk right up to me and they start as if they know me and I should know them. And Forgive me. There's no way that I can know all of that. But my point is that's almost a form of delusion. To come up to somebody, to think that you know them so well. I don't know you, you don't know me. And the only thing that we have in common here, for the sake of this message, is the gospel that I'm speaking. That's the common thread. So go back to what I'm saying about delusion in a relationship. And I think even here, Peter portrays that. Because he says, I've laid down my life for you. But we know he will deny Jesus 3 times. And I'm asking you to think about something, because this is such a familiar passage. You can just kind of block it out, go wool gathering, do whatever you want, but I want you to really think about this. Is it possible that we do that too? Just don't answer. Just answer for yourself inside your head. Is it possible that sometimes we even build up? I have met people who try to portray how spiritual and how holy they are. I don't know. I'm not God. I don't have the capacity. That's between you and God. But I think sometimes people will even play out, depict their delusion. When in fact you can say, listen, I know Jesus, and I know Jesus knows me, but start on the real rock bed truth here. Like Peter, who was very quick to say, I've laid down my life for you. And we know when push comes to shove, he's going to be in a place that's super uncomfortable amongst enemies of Christ. And he's going to say, I know not who he is. I'm not one of his disciples. I don't know him. Has this ever happened to you where you've been somewhere, you've been in a situation where you could have done otherwise, but whatever comes out of your mouth was certainly not what you intended to say? Good, so I'm not alone. And that makes us all probably just like Peter. And to say, for example, that we don't act in our own delusion at times, well, that makes you and me a liar if we don't say that in truth. And I believe that there's a whole lot of that going around. So imagine if, we'll call it, and I don't even want to put it in percentage, but imagine if there is a percentage of people who go through the motions in the church, but there's nothing there. How do you even get real with God when the foundation is bogus? So the whole point of this is to look very carefully, because there are things in here that even for myself, as familiar as I am with this passage, I haven't really taken the time to think about this. When Peter says, I'm going with you, Lord. And the Lord says, no, you're not. The Lord knew Peter wasn't ready for any of this. Okay, same thing. I've met people, they come into the church, they want to do ministry. They're not ready. Let me tell you what makes you ready for ministry. Nothing. You either, God called you and you basically get thrown into the lion's den, or you think that's what you're supposed to be doing. And there are a lot of people that think that's what they're supposed to be doing, but again, it's a delusion, because at the end of the day, they can't stomach dealing with people's problems, dealing with the issues of lack of understanding, or how cavalier people can be towards God and his word. And you start to have that reaction, you realize this is not delusion, this is somebody who cares for souls. There's a connection there. That is what is required. So I'm asking you to carefully look at this, because I think to some degree we've all succumbed to this delusion of our relationship with God, which I'm not your judge. I don't know, that's between you and him, but I'm saying sometimes a reality check or spiritual pulse, okay? Because we can be, and the examples are given for us to learn, just like Peter. So, we have this vignette I'm trying to paint. Imagine if you were Peter and you really love the Lord and you mean well, and the Lord says, you're not ready for this. And he didn't say those words, but I'm giving you the first book of Scott here. You're not ready. That's not going to happen. It'll happen later, but not now. Well, Lord, you don't understand how much I love you, and I'm ready. I'm, all the pontificating. Now, I'm not saying that it's not real. But God knows the difference between a declaration that says, I'm ready, versus somebody who's, I think I'm ready, I'm not sure. Those type of people. It gets sorted out in the pages of this book, and this book becomes a mirror for us to look at ourselves. If we can acknowledge that, as difficult as it is, even if you remember in Luke's gospel, Jesus prayed for Peter's faith to not fail. There's a lot of wisdom in just kind of very carefully picking this apart. Because you can't just look at Peter's restoration and say, oh, and then Jesus restored him and he preached the message that he birthed the church. You've got to look at where the man came from, which is all of us on a journey with constant markers in the journey of failure. And what you do with that failure matters to God. Very easy for us to start reading into the book of Acts after the day of Pentecost to see after the Spirit fell and they've all been equipped in the upper room for Peter to get up and to start preaching and to look at that and say, yeah, I want to be like that. I admire that. But you better look at what came before, because the steps that came before tell you it didn't happen like that. In fact, a careful look at Peter's life with the fragments we have, I think, was a whole series of up and downs. And yeah, wouldn't we all like to be endued with that power, standing up like Peter and preaching, and people are listening and people are riveted? But what came before? 3 times the denial, the big mouth, the impetuous, bold talker, all the pontificating, well-wishing, good-speaking. And then we have this event that happens in the 21st chapter of John. Starting in the 3rd verse, Peter said unto them, I go a-fishing. They said, okay, well, we'll go with you as well. They went forth, entered into a ship immediately that night, caught nothing. If you keep reading, it says, in the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, children, have ye any meat? They answered him, no. He said, cast the net on the right side of the ship, and you shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, it is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from land, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with fishes. And as soon as they were come to land, they saw a fire, coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. And Jesus saith unto them, bring of the fish which ye have now caught. It's kind of interesting, the activity of Simon Peter. There's lots of other people there, but the focus is going to be on Simon Peter. So there are a couple of things I want you to think of here. The references, the multitudinous references to Peter in this passage. And then it obviously gives the answer I said first, but it was the 3rd time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after that he was risen from the dead. So when they had dined, Jesus saith unto Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? And he saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. And he saith unto him, Feed my lambs. Now, again, a familiar passage, very, very careful for the people who are not familiar. Twice, Jesus will ask Peter, do you agape me, that unconditional man-God relationship type of love? Do you agape me? When Peter answers him back, he doesn't say, I agape you, Lord. He says, I phileo you. And people have talked about this, picked this apart. I have repeatedly said over the years that I believe Peter's brain was now reconnoitering the whole scenario here. I better not open my mouth in delusion to say, Lord, I agape you, because I don't really think I can be trusted when my mouth opens to say the accurate thing, as if I'm talking like Peter, I've already proven, right? So he says, Peter's response is, I love, if you have a Bible like mine, the number is 5368, which is phileo, brotherly life. I quid pro quo you love. He didn't say I unconditionally, no strings attached. Do not think less of Peter for now actually speaking with a reality check. See, for those people who followed, I've picked this apart for many, many years. And the first thing that Jesus says to Peter here, feed my lambs, referring to the youngest and the most vulnerable, that would be in and around Peter's responsibility eventually. Why is he saying this? To feed, not feed as in food, but feed as in the Word of God. And he breaks it down, feed my lambs, the youngest, the smallest, the weakest of these. The next exchange shall say to him, again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? Do you agape me, Peter? And he saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I phileo you. And he said unto him, feed my sheep. Now here's shepherd my sheep. So the first one was feed, the youngest, the weakest, the most vulnerable. Here it is shepherd, not feed, but shepherd. So you can definitely see that the words that are being spoken to Peter are a preparation for service that Peter had not yet started. Remember the call that was given, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. Here, the instruction essentially is gearing up to show Peter that not only is he being restored, but he will be restored to service with a purpose. It's not for fun. It's not so he can be delusional again. And what I love about this passage is it's showing you something of the nature of what we actually should be like. Instead of being delusional, in our delusion, we might answer twice and say, Lord, I agape you. At least here I can respect the fact, for whatever the reason, I see a little bit more controlled individual, not in delusion, but kind of, I better not get my mouth going too much here. I want to keep this real. There's something happening right here. Okay. He saith unto him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas. Now here he changes it. Jesus now brings it down. He doesn't say, do you agape me, Peter? He says, do you phileo me? He came down to where Peter was at that level, speaking exactly where Peter is. And this is what I love about anyone who is willing to pay attention. God is not going to talk to you where you are not. He's going to talk to you exactly where you are. And this is what's happening here. And he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee. I phileo you. So again, Peter repeats 3 times, and the threefold question, answer is in direct correlation to the 3 times denial. And the number 3 is important. We always call that divine manifestation. It's God saying, what you did over here, I'm going to fix over here. But I'm not going to put a Band-Aid on it. You, Peter, have to work this out in sincerity, in truth with yourself, not in delusion. Every time a person fails, and I want to be specific here. I've been referencing the church at large, and I think the church at large has failed. And I think a lot of people have failed. That is, whether they get bored and they're searching for other things and Jesus is just not enough for them. That's why all the entertainment and the circuses and everything, whether it's that, or whether it is the delusion of thinking you are in a much greater, closer relationship with God and you know more about Him, even though you seldom, if ever, open up this book. Right? That's a delusion. How could you possibly know all that you could know about God if you're not reading and studying this book? Okay. No takers there. So, what I'm trying to get at is for every failure, so no one thinks that I'm talking down to you, I'll speak for myself. I believe for every time that Melissa Scott fails in ministry, on a personal level, God gives the opportunity for me to look at that failure with eyes wide open, learn from it, and if I can actually see through, I believe, the leading of the Holy Spirit, conviction that comes, God has the ability to restore my thoughts, my mind, my faith, to where I'm no longer looking at the failure and focusing on that and making that the focal point, but I'm making the restorative or the restorative process the focus now, because I realize had it not been for me standing in truth in my own mistakes, God is not able to provide the restoration and the reconciliation that I need to have the relationship again. Does that make sense? If that message is not taken to heart, you have superficial Christianity, impotent, no meaning, quickly moved. People have no, it's like saying I have a clear vision and understand my calling. Now, not everything makes sense to me, but I have the anchor, the mooring, it's there. So when I study Peter in this segment, there's something that actually leaps off the page to me. First, the fact that Christ, who said, by the way, he was going to ascend, this is after he's risen from the dead, that he was going to ascend and go away, and he's not leaving orphans. The beginning of Christianity starts, yes, with Peter preaching on the day of Pentecost, but so interesting that what's given here is instruction for ministry. And that instruction to take care of the youngest, the most vulnerable, the weakest, and when I say take care, that is to feed the Word of God, to instruct, to pastor or shepherd the sheep, to be an under-shepherd for Christ's sake. And all of this, if you think about it, stuffed into one package that's going to stand and bring the church into being, but that couldn't have happened without Peter acknowledging, and there's nowhere here that it says, Peter says, I'm a sinner and I know I've sinned and Lord, if you'll forgive me. It says that nowhere. He didn't need to articulate it, and the reason being is it came out in his speech. This is not the same person speaking here in the 21st chapter from verses 15, say all the way down to verse 23. Not the same person speaking that previously said, be it far from thee, Lord. No, 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 this can't happen. Different person, a little bit more careful with the words, a little bit more, I believe, truthful with self. And that is the beginning. That's when God can actually step in and begin to help you, restore you, and put you back in a place where you're standing on your feet again. But I think the problem that's happened, and I'm just going to come out and say it, the problem that's happened with the church getting so caught up in every other subject and every other activity is forgetting to tell people, and I'll keep saying it, we're all sinners being saved by grace. It's the shed blood of Christ that cleanses us. Jesus said to his disciples, you're made clean by the word. But there is no ability for us outside of that. We can't restore ourselves. You can in the flesh, in the natural. But if we're talking about things spiritual, the restoration that comes from this exchange for us happens through the conviction of the Holy Spirit. You ever been reading the Bible? And passages maybe you've read before, but you read something and it has a whole new personal meaning to you. Like you're staring at it, maybe you have your Bible open, you're looking at it and you think, wow, like I'm just staring at this, but this is me right here. Has that ever happened to you? Yeah. That's conviction that comes. Now, it may not have been that blatantly obvious of what God was trying to point out, but that is the point, being able to listen in that way, pay attention, because there's something that God is going to try to point out through his word. And then not being so delusional to think there's nothing to see or nothing to learn, because there's always something. Now, if you take the rest of this, Jesus says to him, when you were young, you girded yourself and you walked wherever you wanted to go, but he says, but when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. And he spake, signifying by what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said unto him, follow me. And I want you to think about how amazing this is, because that is essentially how Jesus started with the disciples. He called them and he said, follow me. And they began, the Bible says, they forsook their nets and they straightway followed, right? This is the second time now. And he says to him, follow me. So something very clear. And again, it's simple, but it's quite profound. In the moment of Peter not doing the big, impetuous, big mouth, flapping the jaw, he says repeatedly, thou knowest. Think of that. And I want you to, for a minute, stop everything that I'm talking about. Can you, and this is something, it's something that you do for you. I can't do it for you. I can only do it for me. When I think about my failures, when I think about things that I need help with, can I say to God, thou knowest, you know. Nobody else will understand this, God, but you know this. That's something actually quite profound to think about, because it's very simple. But repeatedly, Peter says to Jesus, thou knowest, you know these things. That's when delusion is now gone and reality's kicked in. And I'm wondering if there's anybody in the sound of my voice that can see the beauty of this. Sometimes we don't have the right words and we don't have all the connections and all the perfect things, but to just stand and reflect for a minute. If I say God knows me, not generically, and I know God, not generically. When I can say I know, because I've spent time, because I read the Word, because I learn every day, I have new lessons. And I can say, you know, Lord, in truth. That's like the beginning of God saying, okay, now that you've acknowledged what it is that you need to acknowledge, I can now move you over here, and I can begin working with you once more, because you're not acting. You're not speaking in delusion. You have just spoken in sincerity. Sometimes I think that might even be the best prayer. Lord, you know. You might say, well, okay, that was very profound. I came to church and pastor said I should talk to God and say, you know. But do you really know what I mean? Because that is the key thing. Not can hear something, but if you really know. So now let's pick this apart a little bit. Because here's what's interesting. When the question is asked to Peter, when he says, do you love me more than these? And people have grappled with this. Is he speaking about the rest of the things around him, possessions, people? And I can't tell you definitively, but I can tell you whatever it is. The answer was given in multiplied different passages when we're told to love God with all your heart, all your mind, right? Do you love me more than all this, all of these, all of those? So the answer should have already been there. And again, you don't hear Peter saying, well, you know, Lord, I've loved you for so long. That's what some of us would do. Wax and punt. It's a show. That's why I said last week, quit playing church. We might actually become the strongest body, few in number but strong, because we reach down and we can see we're not building on sand. And we have some good theological foundation here. So the instructions are clear. Something else. You notice Jesus didn't ask him, Do you fear me? Are you afraid of me? Do you approve of my ways? Do you like my words? See, that's the modern ideology. We have to approve of God. We have to like. We have to whatever. He didn't ask any of that. He didn't ask Peter, how many tears have you shed for me? You read that anywhere? He just asked him a simple question. If you really think about it, that's a really great question to ask. You know when you're fighting with somebody, your best friend, your spouse, right in the middle of it, ask them that question. Do you love me? You really put it in perspective. If you do, what the hell are you fighting over? Right? But that's an equally good question. Think of it that the Lord asked Peter. Something for us to reflect on if we're really wanting to look at ourselves and make progress. It is a spiritual inventory of sorts, but it puts things in proper perspective. I'm not flapping my jaw. I'm real with God here. And then 2 times it is said, follow me. And I kind of took these apart. I wanted to spread out the words. So first, if you love me, Jesus speaking now. He doesn't say this, but I'm spinning this. Jesus, if you love me, you'll take care, you'll tend to, you'll instruct the youngest, the weakest, the most vulnerable, those just starting out. You won't despise them. You won't ridicule them. You won't keep them indefinitely on pablum. It's a dig for some of those out there that just never grow. The ministry never grows. The teaching never grows. If you love me, you'll take care of what's mine. Try that one on for size. That's where the church gets sorted out. This may not make sense to anybody, and it maybe will only make sense to me. I doubt it, though. Someone who is really, truly called to ministry is able to answer that question. If you love him, will you take care of what is his for the time that God gave you here on earth? That's the question for every pastor. And if that question is answered properly, and I'm speaking to some that listen to me out there, if it's answered properly, then you have to go back to, what am I called to do? I'm called to feed, to pastor, to protect, to instruct, to guard, to gospelize, to be an ambassador for Christ's sake. All of the things that are connected to ministry, and none of the things that are connected to the world, none of the things that even matter about government or anything else. If I am called to do that, then I am going to be taking the charge that Jesus gave to Peter to heart. If you love me, will you take care of what is mine? That's what's heartbreaking to me, because I feel that there are way too many pastors that are not answering that question. Way too many ministers that are not answering that question. Because if you're taking care, and I'm speaking to those people, as I said, who listen to me, a lot of pastors out there, if you can't answer that question, that you are a temporary custodian of what is his. The souls don't belong to me, and they don't belong to you. They're his. And how do you take care of souls? You feed, you shepherd, you instruct, you teach, you guide, you rebuke, you reproof, you use the scriptures. And all of these things that Paul then sums up and says God gave the gift ministers to the church to equip and to build up the saints till we all come to a singular purpose, which is a oneness, unity in the faith. So that first part is for pastors, but there's a second part to this that is applied to everyone. Are you still following the way you began to follow? This is the way it works. You come and you're so excited, right? I'm with other people. They're like-minded. And you think everything's great now because I'm in the church and no wrongs can affect me and I'm good, because you're walking around like the biggest goony bird that ever was brought into existence. You got this big giant sticker on your back that says target for the devil. It's flashing. It's a neon sign, but you're too obtuse to know that. You're like, I'm in the church. I'm here, right? Until stuff starts hitting the fan. And maybe your following isn't like it used to be. And if you can see even that, that's kind of a failure in and of itself, that you started out with great zeal and great enthusiasm, and as the rough road got a little bit longer and a little bit tougher, the enthusiasm and the zeal kind of waned, and now instead of, we're off to go with Jesus, right? Are you still following like at the first? Because if you answer the question no, that has several different sub-answers to it. No, I'm not following like I was at the first because I've had several failures, and in between, God has showed me, and I've learned, and I've been restored, and I keep growing. Wonderful. But there are people that come in, they answer the call, follow me, that wanes, and then they're following in delusion. They're not committed followers. They don't care about learning. They don't care whether the church lives and exists and continues, or whether the doors close, or whether whatever, it doesn't matter. And this is why this type of a message is important, because if you start picking this apart, you realize it has a much greater impact. You can make a caricature of Peter, and you can make it into some Sunday cartoon, or you can say, that's also me. I see myself there. And you know what? I see myself there. I've seen myself there many times over the years. And the wonderful thing is I don't look at a failure and say, wow, now I need to focus on that, because God's already dealing with that. Just like Peter, he didn't condemn him. He knew what was going to happen. He knew what was in his heart, but he didn't condemn him. He wanted him to speak out the words that would convey what was in his heart, and he did. And there, restoration can occur. The other thing, which I think we should kind of look at, is when he asks Peter, lovest thou me? And he first 2 times, agape, 3rd time, phileo. I'm going to ask you a question. Something not to answer now, but when you're sitting reading your Bible, or you're thinking about the problems you face for the next week, something that you might put yourself right where Peter was when Jesus asked the question. And not something that you should articulate and start flapping. This is something for you to have a conversation with God with. If God stood right in front of you right now and said, do you love me? And use the English word love, because it's so ambiguous as opposed to the Greek. What would your answer be? I can tell you, I wouldn't be flapping my jaw. I'd probably answer what Peter did. You know, Lord, you know, because you know what's in my heart. You know. Anything beyond that might actually be a delusion if we're not careful. And this is what I'm saying to you. So easy to look at the bigger picture. I will never deny you. I will not. And miss the minute points of this. Now, if you want to break these words down, because I did this and I wanted to kind of emphasize this. The words that are spoken here, when he says, lovest thou me, the 3rd time, that agape and phileo, the 3rd time, Christ speaking to Peter. I wanted to kind of see if I could make a personal application first and see how this translates to you. Only using, not agape, phileo, brotherly love. If Christ was standing here, I want to isolate that word. And again, it would be me having a conversation. You would do it for yourself. So if I was asked in the moment, what is it for me to love God? And not even on the highest level. To see, here's where it breaks down, because I'm not expecting God to do for me. He's already done abundantly. If God never did another thing for me, He's done more than I could ever ask for. So I'm actually not looking for phileo love. The thing that I'm looking at towards God is agape love. No strings attached, Lord. Whatever comes my way, I accept it because you brought me here, like Esther, to the kingdom for this hour. I know what it's about. I'm not delusional, but I'm grateful for the reality checks. So the question might be asked, I'm saying, this is my conversation. the Lord asking me, Melissa, do you love me? And I'm only emphasizing the word love right here. Yeah, I do. You know it, Lord. That's going to be my statement. Why? Because the Lord knows what's in my heart. But then add to that, lovest thou. And then I have to look at the person of Christ. The thou is the person of Christ. What he sacrificed, what he's done, how he has brought somebody like me that I've always said, don't know why, but I'm not complaining, into the kingdom. And I think about the thou person, which is God. And how could I not come back to say, how could I not love God? And bring to the last word, me, which is him. And I can only say, how could a person come to know God and know how God is, a loving, forgiving, kind, tender mercies, you name it, long-suffering, and not love God to the degree of saying, Lord, when you called me to follow, I maybe didn't know what I was getting into, but I know where I am now and why I'm following. And no matter what, I will follow you. Because that's my commitment. I'm asking some of you today to kind of look at this the same way and try and think of this. It is paramount that the commission or the charge given to Peter would have been carried out, that he took it to heart, that he took it seriously, which he did. But then that commission and call goes out into the whole world. And here we are, fast forward now in the year 2023, and you have two dynamics at work. One, as I've tried to explain, the weakening of the church, the playing of the church to the delusion. And now here the message today is reality check. It's time to get back to the things that are important, the things that are grounding, the things that will keep us on track no matter what happens, and will help us a little bit with understanding. The instructions, by the way, to Peter were not to entertain the masses, were not to indulge the masses, right? Feed and shepherd. Not feed with food, edible food. Feed the bread of life, the word of God. These are the instructions to the ministers. You have responded to the call, like myself, who are responsible to preach, teach, proclaim. And those, the whole body, everyone who's responsible for thinking of this question today, which is, am I still following? Am I looking at everything that God has done, including pointing out the failures and the missteps and everything else, for real instruction, that I may grow and become the son or the daughter that God intended me to be? And you cannot do that. That will not happen without the reality, the real relationship with God, and the continuing, what I would call, it is faith in action that brings the growth. It's not that stalled out, I'm going to stop here now and I'm going to start examining. Let's spend an hour examining the failures of Peter, when Jesus didn't even waste 30 seconds on it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's so easy to focus on the wrong things. It's so easy to have a negative mindset. It's so easy to look at all this and say, God's against me and I can't make it and there's nothing I can do, and so just give up. Or you can look at this properly and think, study the person, watch his journey. He did not come into the kingdom as some polished, eloquent orator. He came in flapping his jaw, impetuous, saying all kinds of crazy stuff. One time he said something really great, thou art the Christ. The rest of it was kind of meh, like that, all right? But there's a lesson, and that lesson says, number one, don't assume that everything falls into this cookie cutter, that everything is going to be exactly the way you think it should be, because God's ways are not our ways. His correction or his corrective methods. I think some people think God's so sadistic that when he corrects you, he makes it so brutal. He makes it like he's some sadistic killjoy. You're never going to want to experience life again. instead of looking at the grace of God to bring you to an understanding of your failure, but then not to camp out and dwell on it. To say, okay, now it's time to move on. Follow me. Follow me to the disciples, and I'll make you something you're not, which came to pass. And I would keep saying, keep following. You follow me as I follow Christ. And I think the lessons that are engraved here with something that you can say, you know, I've studied this before and I never took the time to actually pick it apart like this. But the importance is not so much about the person's behavior, and as I said, catalog, boastful, he could be leaning on the arm of the flesh, not understanding. The more important focus is that God didn't spend a lot of time, Christ did not spend a lot of time talking about Peter's mistakes. He spent more time trying to help him get the truth out of his mouth, out of his heart, so that he could be restored to the position that God desired him to have in the first place. How about you? I want you to think about that. Are you in the place that God, it's a hard question because you can't answer it. Neither can I. But if you're asking the question, am I at the place that God wants me to be at? The answer is probably no. Work in progress, right? But learning and making progress along the way is part of the trip. And learning from Peter's failure and restoration is not just about the elements behind the failure, but what to do with the failure so that God can use that as a tool to bring you to the place, instead of thinking, well, Christianity should be easy, or some people say it's so hard. How about this? It's a paradox. It's both. Loving God is the easiest thing and the hardest thing. Why? How? Well, you ever been in love with something you can't see? I'd say I love this book and I can touch it, but I can't see God. Express unconditional, undying love for one you have never seen, but tell you what, you read about him and you learn about him and you spend time with him and you come to know who he is. And I don't need to say, I can see, because the eyes of faith have seen and understood. God is not looking to condemn and to break down. Yes, it costs something to follow God. It'll always cost something to follow God. But if you're willing to look at yourself, and this message is each person for themselves. I'm not looking at you to look down at you, nor am I trying to self-abase myself, but reality check. That if we're really careful, this can be an amazing lesson put into practice. Not just to say, well, God was going to restore him anyway, but better to say God used every part of Peter's impetuous, big-mouthed, boastful stupidity for a greater good that taught the lesson, that taught the man, instead of flapping the jaw, some simple words. You love me? You know I do, Lord. You think about it that way. Maybe the church has lost its way so much so that it can't even talk about how easy it is for God to set you back on the right track when the heart is right, when the mouth is speaking, not in delusion but in truth to God. I think greater things for the church can happen if we can get back to the mooring and the examples that are not just biblical, oh, I read this and I know it well, but applicable to each and every one of us. Starts with me, and it must spread to any person in the sound of my voice. Don't get hung up on failure. Get hung up on the fact that God, looking at you, knows you're a failure, knows I'm a failure, knows we'll continue to fail and to mess up, but God, in his infinite wisdom, mercy, and grace, and his love, only expects one thing. As I said, he didn't spend an hour talking to Peter and saying, well, Peter, you could have done different. Let me lecture you on what you could have done differently when they asked and you denied me. Really? Then the lesson wouldn't have been learned. The lesson was learned through what Peter said or maybe what he didn't say. That's the lesson I want us to learn. My hope and my prayer for Faith Center, I can't be responsible for other churches and other places. I'm responsible for what I'm responsible for. But my prayer for this church is that we get fortified in the faith, that we are reaching constantly on a deeper level, that the footing hasn't changed, the rock hasn't changed. And if we're standing just fixed right there, God says there isn't any problem I can't take you through. There isn't any failure I cannot restore you from. And there is something to say. Peter could have kept the mindset, well, when Jesus found me, I was just a fisherman. I handled stinky fish, and that's what I did for a living, and that's all I can do because, that's what I do. No. Jesus said, I have something more for you. And part of that more, we know from the beginning, was you won't be a fisherman anymore. You'll be fishers of men. Something beyond your comfort zone. That is not just Peter's promise. It's ours too. Something beyond your comfort zone. That's going to give him the glory and the greatness. But you got to start first with what I said. And looking at Peter's failure and restoration gives me hope that people will say, you know what? God is not asking me. He never said I could be, nor will I ever be perfect. Knows my frame, knows all the failures in the past, probably knows all the ones yet to come. And he's only looking at one thing. Will I be real with him in that moment to be able to speak the truth, acknowledge where I am? That basically sets me on the path for him to place me back, restore me to the place where now I'm able to stand once more with great confidence and say, this is the God I serve. This is the God you serve. God is not looking for you to be perfect. There's no perfect pastor. Quit putting perfection on me like I have to live up to your standards. I cannot, nor will I will never be able to. You cannot live up to a standard of perfection, but we live by grace, and by God's grace, with every failure, he restores. Keep that in mind. Do not lose sight of that. That's my message. I'm Pastor Melissa Scott, pastor of Faith Center, Glendale, California. I teach every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you'd like to attend services with us, simply call the 800 number, that is 800-338-3030, to join us. If you'd like to watch, listen, and learn 24 hours a day, simply log on to our website at www.pastormelissascott.com.